Time to elevate.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Running on Empty. I'm Matt.
And I'm Tony.
And we are running on empty. And this episode, we've got a really cool topic. One of the topics I've wanted to talk about for a while. And Tony, thank you for getting this all set up. But we're going to be talking about climate change. And who do we have with us today?
Yes, you're right, Matt. We are going to talk about climate change. And I'm lucky. I teach at a campus, UW Oshkosh, that has so many brilliant scientists who are also kind of like activists, I would call them, on the issue of climate change. And we're lucky to have one with us today. Her name is Dr. Shannon Davis-Foust, and she's a lecturer in biology and environmental studies at UWO. She earned her doctorate degree in aquatic biology from UW Milwaukee. Her research interests include habitat restoration and best methods to reconnect people with nature. She is the current president of the Wild Ones Fox Valley Area Chapter, and she's the co-coordinator of the Oshkosh Chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby. On our campus, Dr. Davis-Foust advises the Student Environmental Action Coalition and the Sustainable Beekeeping Club. Shannon, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tony, for the nice introduction.
Right. Let's just start off with the real basic question. We hear global climate change all the time. And even though it's talked about a lot, many people just don't know what is meant by that. So just give us the layperson's definition. What is global climate change?
Global climate change is often used interchangeably with climate change and global warming. And I tend to use them interchangeably as well. It's said that global warming is more specifically referring to the increase in the temperature of the Earth. But this is the average temperature, keeping in mind there are certain regions on the planet that are cooling. But for the most part, most of the Earth is appreciably warming and faster than ever before in the history of the planet. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about global climate change, we're talking about more specifics in terms of not just that the planet is warming and the mean temperature, but also all of the other side effects, such as the changing in precipitation patterns and the melting of mountain glaciers and Greenland and Antarctica and the Arctic glaciers, the rising sea levels that go along with that, the changing and stronger storms, and then even getting into the effects on wildlife in terms of their reproductive times and changing and expansion and declines in ranges and changes in diseases, and the list goes on and on. So when we talk about global climate change, it's said that we're talking about all of the side effects, not just the warming.
So this sounds like something, obviously, that should be urgent, right? This is something that should be treated with a global sense of urgency, correct?
Absolutely. There is no more urgent issue on this planet today.
All right. So, Matt and I agree with that, right? Mm-hmm. That there's no more urgent issue. So if that's true, and the three of us obviously agree that it is, why would you say it's not treated with that sense of urgency? Or is there something going on that we're not aware of? Are global governments, for example, treating this with the urgency it deserves?
On the surface, proposals are being made. Agreements are being made that we will reduce our carbon emissions and achieve, as they call it, carbon neutrality, meaning net zero emissions by certain dates. However, the plans often fall short, right. And what has been proposed so far falls very short of what we need to achieve climate stability.
So, well, then what would be needed? When you say they fall short, what is lacking in these proposals?
They're empty. They don't specifically explain how they will achieve the target date. Even at the UW Oshkosh campus where I work, we have proposed the date of 2030, and we admittedly don't have a plan that would achieve that by 2030, not at this point. And we're looking at 7.5 years to achieve the goal.
What is this because of the power of the fossil fuel lobby?
I think that's part of it, but I think a bigger part of it is that people just don't know how to change. The infrastructure is so engraved in fossil fuel usage that we don't have a way to do it yet. It's just changing this quickly is too much. There is no other single source of energy that can replace fossil fuels. We have to use a wide variety of energy sources and ingenuity in order to achieve the goal. And it's difficult to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Shannon, what is your response to people who say that these changes we are seeing in climate are just part of a so-called natural cycle that has existed since the beginning of time? What do you say to people who make that argument?
Unfortunately, I hear that all too often. I myself am part of a more conservative community, and as recently as a few weeks ago, I was talking to some farmers about, they were talking about their crops, and I had mentioned something about the changing precipitation patterns in relation to climate change, and I immediately had one of them respond to me that they don't believe in climate change. It's unfortunately, it seems to be a very big part of our conservative American culture to deny that climate change is really happening. But when you look at the scientific evidence, there simply is no doubt that it's happening. And if you think about it, we are burning fossil fuels that have been sequestered in the ground for 300 million years.
Right.
Putting them back into the atmosphere since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution at a crazy fast rate. And we can measure the increase in carbon in the atmosphere. And we've understood the greenhouse effect for decades. I don't understand how people can deny it. Yet there are still many deniers out there that are putting things out on the web, creating false peer-reviewed documents that say that climate change is fake. And there's dozens and dozens of alternative explanations to climate change. And if it was so simple as to say there was a different cause, then why can't they settle on that one thing? Even insurance companies know what's happening as we see insurance rates increasing for, say, floods that are supposed to happen every 100 years that are now happening every other year. And the list goes on with wildfires and such.
I was reading an article in the New York Times, I think just this morning, about how the Great Salt Lake is drying up in Utah. And they were talking about the environmental devastation of that. And what was so tragic about the article was it said that even though the Utah officials know what's going on, they're kind of like paralyzed, that it's almost impossible to make the changes that need to happen to save the Great Salt Lake. And I think that's going around the world, as you're suggesting, Shannon, right? People know that there's this issue, but changing is difficult. What has to happen to get us out of that mindset?
Well, in terms of oh gosh, that's a really big question. It's
right.
Really difficult to answer. I tend to always go back to the roots. I think a lot of the denial comes from the fact that people have not been. This hasn't been part of our educational infrastructure in terms of even going to elementary school. I've asked, for my own children, I've asked their teachers, what are you teaching about climate change? And they're barely touching on it, and they're teaching it as if it's an hypothesis of what's causing it. It needs to be heavily integrated into our, starting in, I would say around 4th or 5th grade, heavily integrated into our curriculum. Otherwise, you have these adults that, of course, are going to deny it. They're not going to sit and watch a PBS documentary on this. No, they're going to more likely to be playing games or watching some fiction movie rather than digging into the facts and realizing that they're part of the cause and they're part of the solution, and they have to know about it in order to feel motivated to do anything about it.
Yeah. Wow. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, the fossil fuels really get a bad rap for a lot of this. But one of the things that what's your thoughts about like massive animal agriculture? Out here in Colorado, we've got, as we're driving, from northern Colorado into Nebraska, they got these mega farms that just reek. I mean, they stink so bad. They got these giant slurry pits that can't be good for the environment, I would think. But what's your take on that?
I'm glad you brought that up, Matt. Yes, industrial farming is a big problem, and not just so much so that our industrial agriculture, our food production system is heavily reliant on fossil fuels. So in other words, we are feeding our people reliance upon fossil fuels that we cannot continue to burn like this. Mm-hmm. We need to go back to a way that is much less fossil fuel reliant, and industrial agriculture is not the answer to that. The oil, coal, and gas, the energy that goes into producing the crops that are fed to the animals and transported to the animals, and not just so much that, but also the methane that is produced by the animals. Yeah. Right now, they're saying methane is accounts for 25% of climate change that's happening right now.
Wow. I guess I'll go back to Tony's, question. We talk about this natural cycle. Let's take people out of the equation and the Industrial Revolution out of the equation. Would it still be happening just at a ridiculously slow rate? Or, is this something that is literally a man-made thing? Because I'm guessing, as time goes on, the Earth is going to do what it does. But does that necessarily, is that also climate change just, naturally? And then obviously we're accelerating it to a degree that's never been seen before. But I mean, I guess my question is this something, if you take people out of the equation, is this something that was happening anyway? Not to diminish the effect of what it is, but is it something that, was always going to happen?
There are many climate forcers. And yes, volcanoes are a climate forcer. Our land use is a climate forcer. So in other words, anything that influences the climate is a climate forcer. Right now, actually, we're supposed to be headed towards an ice age. Very slowly. Right now, the rate of change of heating on the planet is faster than ever before in the geologic history of the planet. And there are natural heating and cooling cycles on the planet based on the Earth's rotation, the Milankovitch cycles, and the Earth's wobble. But these changes happen at a rate of tens of thousands of years. We're looking at seeing climate change happening in a person's lifetime, which is literally unheard of. So under 100 years, even within a decade, we're seeing changes. We can personally observe changes where we are in terms of droughts and stronger storms and what have you. So no, this would not be happening if it were not due to the actions of mankind.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Shannon, so much of our economy is tied up in fossil fuels, and we hear this argument all the time that to seriously address climate, say with a Green New Deal, would wreck the economy. What do you say to people who claim that we can't have both things? We can't save the Earth and have a strong economy. What do you say to those folks?
That's largely a myth. There is some foundation to it, but mostly it is a myth. The clean energy sector has shown over and over again with economic analysis that it actually provides more jobs and that it's overall much more financially sustainable. And if you think about the disasters that are caused by climate change in terms of stronger storms and wildfires and floods and all of the funding that has to go to fixing those disasters and helping people, or even preventing the disasters, building more seawalls, things like that, that absorbs a ton of money too. That's a huge economic cost. So overall, taking action against climate change is absolutely the most financially sound thing that we could do.
Wow. I every now and then I teach the intro to public speaking course on our campus, and there's always a couple of students that'll give a speech on the environment, and it's usually a persuasive speech, and they'll usually end up by saying things like, and what you should do is, recycle and make sure you shut the lights off in a room. And, they'll advise things that we really all should do. But and I usually give those speeches really good grades. Are but are those things, Shannon, like even a dent in what we need to do? Like what? This is what I'm trying to get at here. What really do we need to do? Like when you say there's major changes needed, should we have like every family should have not more than one car in their household? Should we get rid of 2,000 square foot homes? Like what kind of radical dramatic action really does need to happen in your judgment to address this issue seriously?
It's funny that you would ask that, because I do work with grade schoolers and I often ask them what they can do to help the planet. And the first thing they'll say is recycle and turn off the lights. Every little bit does help, and definitely setting up that mental model with children that we need to do something and they can do small things, and it's very important that they do small things because we're all part of this. Nobody's exempt. But you're right. We need to do a lot more than recycle. For one thing, recycling is it's energy intensive. There's many problems with recycling. It's better than throwing it in the dump, but it's definitely not saving a whole lot of energy. So we need to impress upon people more active lifestyles in terms of getting on a bike and using that and living closer to where they work or go to school, changing our infrastructure, getting them to support public transit, more trains and buses. Buses are actually an extremely efficient form of transportation, and I would be the first person on a bus. I live in Amro, and I would be on a bus every day to Oshkosh if one existed. So changing infrastructure and getting that into people's minds that we really do have to make these changes. Otherwise, we're going to see a future that we don't want to see. Yeah. And we have to, the sooner we make the changes, the easier the transition will be.
Yeah, I mean, everyone is complaining about the price of gas, right? No one likes paying $5-6 a gallon for gas. But I mean, the other side of that coin is the cheap fuel over the years has greatly contributed to this crisis that we're in.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so I'm hoping that as a result of the high gas prices, Shannon, maybe more people will bike or walk or demand that their government produce some sustainable mass transit. Do you feel the same way?
Absolutely. As being part of the Citizens Climate Lobby, we advocate for putting a price on carbon, which means taxing the fossil fuel company. And in our scheme, the tax money then goes back to the people as a dividend to compensate for the increased cost of living that is associated with the increased cost of fossil fuels. So people are actually compensated to increase, to stay with the increased cost of living. But now this is happening for whatever reason. And I'm one of the people that are silently cheering on the sideline. Yes, I'm glad that gas prices are going up. Please don't hate me for that. And I see so many comments against, like, don't blame me. I voted for Trump. But the president has nothing to do with the increased cost of gas. We need to see that because I've been driving to work every day and my car is the littlest car on the road. I have a small car. I've been driving a small car my entire life that I've been driving. And I look around and I can see there's definitely not enough understanding or impetus to drive more fuel economic vehicles. And the truth is the United States has the poorest fuel economy in the entire planet. Yeah, as a country.
Well, what are some examples of things going on in the Fox Valley of Wisconsin or the UW Oshkosh campus that, in your judgment, represent some constructive ways of addressing climate change?
Well, on campus, we're unique because we are, a higher education institution, and we're very much on board that this is a major problem that we have to fix. And my understanding is we have pledged carbon neutrality by 2030, like I mentioned before, but we're not quite sure how we're going to do that. We have switched over from burning coal to natural gas back in 2020, but that's definitely not enough. It's simply a bridge to get us to a point where we can find a different energy source for our campus, for heating and for electricity. In terms of the city, We have the Sustainability Advisory Board, and they do carbon analyses from time to time. I am not a member. Like I said, I live in Amro. So the current initiatives, of course, are to increase energy efficiencies and finding any way to reduce carbon emissions that's not too painful.
Right.
It's very difficult to convince people, but maybe now with the increased costs of gas and other fossil fuels, maybe that'll be easier to persuade government officials to follow what the Sustainability Board is advising. But I also very importantly want to mention that changing in land use is also extremely important. I'm a member of the Wild Ones. I've been a member of Wild Ones for 10 years, and this group advocates for planting native habitat. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with climate change? Well, the benefits of native habitat are multidimensional. So we not only provide habitat for many species that, by the way, we're also in a 6th mass extinction event, which is strongly related to climate change. So we're providing habitat for species to help them out. Then we're also improving water quality because those native plants can take up a lot of nutrients and water and prevent erosion and other water erosion. Erosion that's caused by water flow off the land of stormwater, help clean that water that way. But also those native plants have massive root systems and they can sequester a lot of carbon into the ground long term, much more so than say farm fields that are mostly annual crops that only temporarily hold in that carbon. And we, of course, the native plants don't need the constant tilling or any or treatments. Native plants are suitable for the location, and they don't need really any input at all, except for maybe an occasional prescribed burn. So just planting native plants in yards is helpful. If you think about the carbon sequestration and the less use of lawnmowers output a lot more carbon than a typical vehicle, and other pollutants as well. So you know, besides turning off your lights and recycling and maybe driving less, planting up your yard in native plants is also an important thing to do.
Well, I use a push mower personally, and I live close to our campus. If I drive to work 2 or 3 times a year, that's a lot. So, and I would encourage people to I always tell my students this, Shannon, that when they start looking for jobs, to mindfully think about where they want to live and is it close to where they work, so that they don't have to be driving all the time. Wanted to ask you about a growing number of youth are saying that we need to be more militant on this issue. People like Greta Thunberg and a movement called the Extinction Rebellion, mostly young people arguing that the baby boomers have made it clear that they're not going to fix this, and the system needs to be pushed in more militant ways. What's your view on the kinds of activism that are needed to get action going on this? Because it is pretty clear that the United States federal government is not acting, and the state governments are very slow to act. And we're lucky at the local level when we set up a sustainability board, right? But what's your view on the kinds of activism that are needed at this point?
That's a dangerous question, asking if we need to become more militant. We definitely need more impetus to make changes. If you train dogs, they say if you reward them, you're going to train them much faster than if you punish them. So I believe that if we offer much stronger incentives to use renewable energy and change over to electric vehicles, so government funding, helping people make those transitions and make them pretty juicy looking so that people really can't go wrong. We just put in solar panels in the last year, and it's sad to say that we're getting some kind of a tax relief from it, but it's been going down, and I think it's supposed to end this coming year, unless they put something new in place. There should be much stronger support for somebody who wants to put in solar panels or buy a more efficient vehicle even. My understanding is you have a higher registration fee if you have an electric vehicle, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So much more support for people who want to do the right thing is absolutely needed as part of our infrastructure.
Earlier,
some positive reinforcement. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, you were saying that you've got these time goals, but that there's not necessarily like the plan seems a little bit kind of not as cohesive. What would you say are the biggest things that would need to happen to achieve those goals? I think did you say like 2030? What was what are the biggest things that need to happen to actually get there?
Putting in that infrastructure of renewable energy is absolutely necessary, and making it available to people. For many years, I wanted to switch over to some form of renewable energy, and it seemed so far out of reach because the solar panels are not cheap to put in.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So much more funding and push by our government to give people dangle the carrot so that you just don't even, it's a no-brainer to switch over to renewable energy. Right now, people have to sacrifice a lot to make that investment. That's just not right, considering how serious this issue is.
Yeah, that's such a great point, right? We ought to reward people for doing the right thing. And instead we have the opposite incentives, unfortunately. You did mention a carbon tax earlier. Are there countries around the world that have put a carbon tax in place? Do you know?
Yes, in fact, Canada has, although we don't like to call it a carbon tax. We prefer to call it a carbon fee and dividend, because truly a tax would be something that would be the revenue would be going to fund the government. And if you have a carbon fee and dividend in place, it's not a tax in the sense that it goes to fund the government, because a dividend comes back to the people. It's kind of like an oil royalty,
Sure,
where you're compensated and you can afford them that increased cost of living.
So what I don't understand is how was Canada or other countries able to get this carbon fee and dividend in place? And in our country, it just seems like we can't just get moving on something like that. Is it just the corruption in our political system?
That's
is it
that's
really
a big question.
I mean, is it really that simple? Because think about this, right? I can't think of one person I know who would turn down a dividend, right? That would refuse to do healthy things if they were going to be compensated for it. And yet we just seem to not be able to move on these things. It's so frustrating.
Anytime you say we're going to impose some kind of a fee or tax, who's going to vote for that politician? You can't stand up there in your election campaign and say, well, we're going to start by increasing this tax on your gasoline. It's not going to work. And that's a foundational issue with democracy.
Right.
I don't have the answer. That's really hard. I don't understand how Canada did get it passed, and here in the United States, we can't seem to do it. There are actually, if you look out there are many articles. Like, I remember back when Trump was president, there were people that there are articles out there saying it would be really smart for Trump to put in a carbon fee and dividend, because it actually, all of the economic analyses show that would boost our economy.
Yeah.
I don't know why that's being ignored.
Yeah. Well, I mean, wouldn't you think that the Biden administration would be touting it more? I mean, they're supposed to be more liberal, and I have not heard them. I mean, I imagine that there are people in the administration who do support the carbon fee and dividend, but it doesn't seem to be at the top of their priority list.
I thought it would be more with them too, and I'm super disappointed it's not. And I have no explanation for why it doesn't seem to be.
Yeah. Yeah, in some ways, they're going in the opposite direction. They're talking about ways of bringing down the prices of the fuels. And I mean, I understand politics, right? I mean, these people want to get reelected, and there's a lot of evidence that when gas prices are high, the party in power, when the prices are high, tends to take the punishment for that at the polls. But at some point, someone needs to be big enough and show the leadership to finally tell the truth about these issues. And it doesn't seem like we're there right now.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I feel like they are stuck, because if Biden wants to stay in office and he says, well, we're going to keep the gas prices as they are, that's not compatible.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and everyone talks about involving youth in civic engagement and activism. When I talk to my students, you probably get the same thing, Shannon. This environmental issue is something that does make people passionate. I mean, they see that they may not have a future, and I just wish that our politicians would tap into that more, because I don't know how you feel. I don't see the young people being the people that are holding us back on this.
I don't think they are.
No.
Well, be careful. I hear that too from my students and from around the world. I hear a lot of young people making big speeches and doing important things. But at the same time, I've been heavily involved with climate activism for quite a long time. I've been teaching about climate change since about 2008.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of lack of action. I don't see people putting their feet in and actually taking action. For example, the Citizens Climate Lobby Oshkosh chapter that I've been heading up now for quite a few years, we've had very few students involved, very few people at all. We're constantly campaigning and trying to get new people involved to help us,
Right.
maybe table at events or what have you. It's very easy work. It's very social work. We are with a group of wonderful people that are trying to do the right thing. And yet we struggle with membership terribly. So people say they want to do something. They say they recognize there's a problem, but yet they won't even join a group that is trying to fight climate change.
Well, they would like it done through probably social media type of activism. Is that called like slacktivism or something like that? Seriously, right? I mean, I've found it interesting. Right? Yeah,
we've
go
been
ahead,
online. All of our meetings have been online since the pandemic, and it's the way it should have been from the start. Because why are you burning fossil fuels to go to a climate change group?
Right.
And I've really enjoyed getting to know the people, and the Zoom meetings work beautifully for what we're tackling. And we have occasional face-to-face things, but our work isn't hard, and it's actually it's rewarding. You just get into a good network of people.
Wow. Shannon, we are just about out of time, and we really want to thank you for being here, for letting us know about the urgency of this, and hopefully this show in its own small way will help provoke people to get more involved.
We're doing our part.
I sure appreciate the invitation. It means a lot to get the word out there.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Wow, Tony, another fantastic interview. And again, this one was on a topic that is I'm really passionate about, and we try to do our part with regards to climate change. But I like it when we have somebody on the show that it really is taking as much action as possible. Yeah,
Dr. Shannon Davis-Foust is one of the teacher, scholar, activists that we have on the campus that is really, I think, making progress on this issue, helping people learn about it and teaching them what they can do to help create a better environment for us. But as she suggested to us in the interview, this is quite a mountain we're climbing here. It looks like there's a long way to go, unfortunately. Yeah. Well, I mean, the sense I got talking to her, Matt, was it's not that we don't have the knowledge. I mean, the knowledge is there. We know what needs to be done. The issue is, how do we get governments and people at the grassroots level to actually do it?
A lot of people talk about it, but they're not doing anything.
Right. One thing we didn't bring up on the show is, to me, it's just so horrible that addressing climate change in this country is a partisan issue. Like, why would saving the earth be a partisan issue? To me, it's the same thing as gun violence. Like when you see kids gunned down in a school, how could it be partisan to work towards solutions to do something about that? Somehow our political system has gotten so completely out of whack.
Yeah.
I mean, partisan issues should be things like, how high should the taxes be? How low should the taxes be? So on and so forth. But something like saving the planet so that our kids and grandkids and great grandkids can actually enjoy the planet. The idea that there's like a left and right way of looking at that's a problem in my judgment.
Actually, in the notes, I want to put a little link. It's a video came out a handful of years ago, but it's Julia Roberts as Mother Nature. And she talks, it's really cool because she talks about, the earth is designed to survive. I mean, we're, as humans and whatnot, parasites on the planet. And if the earth has survived for billions of years, I mean, we're just the next thing in line. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. That's, yet to be seen. Mm-hmm. But the people, it's really about our survival. I think the planet's going to be fine in the long run. It's us. And, 99.99% of all things that have ever been an organic life on this planet have become extinct at one point or another. And now, we're, what's our timeline? I don't know. I mean, it's obviously going to happen. Probably. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen in our lifetime, but anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, I guess for the remaining time we have left, you are already in the mountains, Matt. So you're elevated
all the time.
All right. So the rest of us should stay elevated.
Stay elevated. We'll see you next time, everybody. Take care.
Running on Empty with Matt and Tony.